My name is Ras Oduno Tariq, aka Baba Tariq Oduno, aka Baba Oduno. I want to thank Ras Kwasi, the family, the Lion's Voice, and it is time appropriately for the Lions to tell our story, where our noble ancestors will be honored, and we know that we have not been a negligible factor in the history of our story in the world. Thank you very much. There is no culture without agriculture. And without agriculture, I don't even want to think about it. Peace.
What do you have to tell the people about Rastafari?
Light to the world. The king of kings and the conquering line of the tribe of Judah. Elected himself, first rightful ruler. Hey yo! Yeah, hail them high, hail the black king on the 23rd of July. So tell them guy, who praise God up in the sky, it's a lie. The Almighty living on your night. From ancient time them a try. Them Romans know them just open them suit and ties. Criminals ain't got no alibi, they stole my people. Then them comes without them genocide.
Are you talking about slavery?
Them couldn't kill the lion we come conquer Judah tribe.
Who?
Go through tribulation, I strive, see sufferation, I still rise. That's why we tell them in America, live Rastafari in every ghetto area. We come to tell them in a Toronto, straight to Italy.
All right, so talk to me about the U.N.I.A, how you became familiar with the Honorable Marcus Garvey when you became an official member, and then also from there, you know, when you became aware of Emperor Haile Selassie, Ethiopia, etc.
I would say it was probably somewhere in my 8th or 9th grade years. I grew up in 2 barbershops in Beaumont, Texas. One of the barbershops was my barbershop in what it was called the Negro Wall Street on Forsyth and Natchez and Wall and College Street. And so in the barbershop, you have a conglomeration of people who are coming through. And I probably heard of the name from a giant before Marcus Garvey, because I heard of Jack Johnson,
Okay,
the boxer.
okay.
And so Jack Johnson coming out of roughly 50 miles out in the Gulf of Mexico from Galveston Island. And so, you know how somebody would come through and say, well, you know, the people said the only people that we heard of in the world was Jack Johnson and Marcus Garvey. And so you would hear that, and what happened is that there were men and women, even though they didn't articulate the name, they articulated the practice. And it wasn't the practice of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey as I knew of in July of 1977. It was the practice of Booker T. Washington. Okay? It was the practice of Booker T. Washington, because there were schools named after Booker T. Washington. Not a high school in Beaumont, Texas, but it was an elementary school. There were schools named after Mary McLeod Bethune. I attended Adams, which was named after an African descendant. I attended Paul Laurence Dunbar Junior High School. I also attended Charlton Pollard, which merged roughly in 1926. There were 3 high schools supposedly under the name. There was a Lucky, there was a Charlton, there was a Pollard, and the people who guided them was Professor Lucky from Prairie View. Our first graduates from Charlton was the Charlton School, and it's almost impossible to talk about reading schools without talking about the spiritual houses.
Okay.
The spiritual house was Live Oak Baptist Church, which it's not unusual. The church is occupied more like Friday, Wednesday, Sunday. The other days of the week, they're open. So many of the people who were at Live Oak Baptist Church, some of them had gone to Prairie View, A&M, agriculture and mechanical. Some of them had gone to Wiley, agriculture and mechanical. And some of these schools had a little bit varied name when they started.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that people went to saying something to you like, well, you better check yourself. You're trying to act like Jack Johnson. You better check yourself. You know what I mean? You better stay in line. You're trying to act like Jack Johnson. And the code was, and it probably wasn't before I was, somewhere in the 9th on to the 10th grade, that I had heard of Jack Johnson when we were in elementary school. But the code evolved. And the code evolved was that Jack Johnson stood on his own, stood on his own foundation, and not only inside the boxing ring. Intellectually, also he's considered someone who made an innovation on the adjustable wrench. And to be disparagingly of Jack Johnson, these other people who classify themselves as white, a slice of them went to calling it the monkey wrench. Okay?
That's where the name monkey wrench comes from?
That's a part of it, yeah.
Okay.
And so, but what happens is that, see, the whole name of Marcus Garvey came into effect because there were women and men who were race men and race women. They had to depend upon themselves. They had to do for themselves. They had to build their own schools. They had to build their own churches. They had to build their own businesses. Now, quite naturally, you had some people who fell in with the line of wanting to go along with, I call it, you got the visionary, the thumb. You got the visionary planners, doers. They step out in front.
Yes.
Then you got the pioneers. The pioneers help build. Then you have the trailblazers. The trailblazers open up what may have been covered over by the pioneers and the visionary planners. Then you got the people who come in who are reformers. The reformers, though they are part of whatever they are part of, they kind of want to go along probably more like 60% and not go along 40%. Then the next group of people you had, which I call AKA, they are either the straddlers or the fence riders. They want to do 50-50. They're trying to see which way the wind is blowing. And then you had
a lot of those now.
Yeah, that's a septenary that I use.
Yeah.
And then you have the sixth one. It's called a bandwagoners.
Yes.
Okay, we can go ahead and do something after the visionary planners, doers, pioneers, trailblazers, and even to some degree the reformers have done something. Okay. And so then you had number 7, which I call the don't give a doggers, which that's an AKA with the Panther Party, which called the lumpen proletariat. That means that they don't care about no laws, no rules. They're going to get it how they can, when they can, under any circumstance. And they may even, quote, by any means necessary. So that's why it's very important to have come up around a sufficient number of race men and race women, even though they did not mention the name that often of Marcus Garvey. They mentioned the name of George Washington Carver.
Okay.
They mentioned the name of George Washington Carver, and quite naturally, George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington are like twin towers. It's almost like Booker T. Washington's second wife, Olivia Davidson, and his final wife was Margaret Murray, who was from D.C., but she graduated from M Street School for Colors, which became Dunbar roughly in 1914, 1915 in Washington, D.C. And Helen Burroughs.
Okay.
graduated from the same school
And
a
we
little
were,
bit later in 1896, and many others. And if you had people like Dr. Grimke, the Grimke sisters,
Mhm.
Carter G. Woodson, Anna Julia Cooper, our sister Mary Church Terrell,
Mhm.
and that's just a short list of people of excellence.
Well, I know you go deep. So what made you become a member of the UNIA? You are just kind of hearing this voice as a whisper, people talking about Marcus in the same sentence with Jack Johnson. But when
Well,
did you become actually a member and take that step?
I became a member. I heard something about it in late 1967, in the fall, and there were some people who told me, "Don't deal with these Negroes." They said, "Don't deal with these Negroes," and they named the names. Now they didn't say the Black Cultural Center, okay, but it just so happened Keith Bray, who was the director of the Black Cultural Center, and the Benjamin Banneker weekend school, Cliff Hooper, also who wrote the book Black Father, Black Faith. You had David Mills, who had played basketball at Seattle University, and at the time, I was a student athlete at Seattle University because I had, in fact, had about 45 offers from major PWI institutions, that's
Yes.
predominantly white institutions.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, even though I came out of the Solid South, and I don't remember any of my teachers who went to other than a so-called Negro college at that particular point in time. Yet, I had decent grades. When I talk about decent grades, I probably came out of high school with roughly about a 3-point average.
Okay.
I stayed on the honor roll intermittently.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was mentioning to Brother Kwasi, I said I was on the student council.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, my name was Albert Woods. But the interesting thing, I didn't use Woods. I used Ferdinand because that was the name on my birth certificate.
So, what was the year that you became a member of the UNIA?
November of 1968. My mother Sarah Lynch, and her daughter Daisy Boyetta, they had the Garvey bookstore in Seattle.
Okay, so you were in Washington State.
I was in Washington State, in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Not Washington, D.C., Washington State on the West Coast, Northwest.
Yes. And they had a few other, what you call, people who were Garveyites, but they were not necessarily in the Evergreen Division number 50, which was established in 1921.
Okay, in Seattle. Okay,
in Seattle.
And how did you get from Beaumont, Texas, to Seattle?
I was a big dog in basketball. I either flew or went to 7 colleges my senior year during the month of March. I didn't have to fly out to Lamar State College of Technology, that because I was in Beaumont. I was supposed to line up to be playing with Elvin Hayes under Guy Lewis at the University of Houston. It was kind of a little bit too close.
Okay.
That's only 85 miles, right?
Okay.
And so, since some people thought I was a decent student in school, I visited Cal Berkeley with the head coach, Herreras. I went to Oregon State at Corvallis in Oregon. But I'm going to come back and go east. I visited Murray State in Paducah, Kentucky, even though I had to fly into Louisville, take a smaller plane that took us on to Murray State College. But the beautiful thing about it, and I'm not going to forget it, I also visited the University of Nebraska at Lincoln.
Okay.
And so I eventually visited Seattle University. And I don't know whether I was wise or whether I heard the older brothers. I signed a letter of intent with the University of Houston, Guy Lewis, slated to play along Elvin Hayes. And it may not have been Elvin Hayes, it may have been somebody else, but Elvin was already there 2 years ahead of me. And then And then I signed with Seattle University. I had a very difficult time in Seattle University my first year, but the interesting thing that happened is that both of them were independents. And so if you signed with independents, you left yourself a greater latitude and longitude, because if you signed with any school that was in a conference, you could not go to a school in the conference.
No, the conference if you left them.
Yeah, you could. Yeah. And so, and then subsequently, and I always liked the missus, and it was a whole lot of cultural things. I had a less than a year later, our mother passed, September 1967, and I shifted to a community college in Bellevue. Across.
Was it for financial reasons that you shifted, or?
No, I shifted. I shifted because I flunked out of college.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were you having a good time?
Well,
Baba?
I don't think it was so much that I was having a good time. It was just the adjustment.
Being on your own.
Being on adjustment, being on our own. So when I went to Bellevue, some people wanted me to play the first year. I said, oh no, I got to pull my grades up.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, so I practiced with the team that won the state championship in junior college, but I was not on that team. The next year, I came out strutting, and so I ended up being on the first 5. I ended up being on the board committee with over 300 rebounds that year, and it would have been remiss of me that I patterned my game after William Felton Russell, that many of you call, and the population called, Bill Russell, who was born in Monroe, Louisiana. He had an older brother by the name of Charlie Russell, who was also an athlete, but he was also a scholar. And as you said, you would make a screenshot. There's a picture that I have of myself in here at Bellevue. I just made the adjustment. It's not a sin to fall. It's a sin to fall and don't get up. This was something they did with me. This is me here, November of 1968.
And we're gonna take a picture and put it on the screen. In terms of, have you had a chance to visit the continent of Africa?
No, I have not.
Okay. And then tell me, in terms of, what was your first interaction with Rastafari and learning about Haile Selassie? Well, first, I would imagine growing up you heard about the emperor.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
What did you hear?
It was just kind of, he wants to rule over people, a whole lot of different kinds of things. But what buttressed that, because remember, we knew, and for some reason, even in the Baptist church, we knew of Psalms 68:31, princesses shall come out of Egypt and Ethiopia shall soon stretch forth their hands. So even though they were saying what they were saying, we had already, will Ethiopian change his spot, or will a leopard?
Yes. Can an Ethiopian
change
his color, or a leopard his spots?
And then we also heard
Jeremiah.
Look not upon me because I'm black and comely.
Yeah. One King of Kings, one throne. Thrones of the house of the great King David. I and I the generation of them that seek him, that seek the high face, O Jah. So lift up your heads, O you Ethiopians, and be lifted up, O you ever live indoors, and let the King of Mount Zion Yadi. Well, we are king, we're that crown. Stepping on the ring now, she won't back down. Ready for we a can fi stand our ground. Attack the black man and them get smacked down. She a queen, we're that crown. Stepping at the ring now, she won't back down. Ready for we a can fi stand our ground. Attack the black woman and them get smacked down. For combat, have to stand for the black. Stand against the beast when the beast come attack. When the beast send crack, try to tear us down. When the lion roar, everybody hear the sound in Babylon town. Wicked man grind drone, earthquake shake, all them bars will break. Well, here's a hot take. There's a brimstone lake, somebody gotta pay for the choice they make. Yo, be careful what you say, cause some news is fake. And every crew got a stitch to watch the moves you make. Well, it's not Drake, but the song's still great. Give your truth and rights, ladies, move the way. Say yo,